Shanna, there you are.
Hi.
Everybody, this is Shanna. She is the recruiter for Ant Culture. She's the head of our people experience department. And I invited her here, after reading this thread, um, I wanted to give you guys two different perspectives, one from me as the hiring manager and one from her as the, first initial screener and recruiter from their perspective. So you could get insight from both of us in terms of like, what we're looking for, what stands out, what are some things that you should avoid doing, etc., as well as answer some of the many questions. Shanna, did you see the document that I shared with you?
Yes, I was able to look through that throughout the day here and excellent question. So great job. I came with some notes here.
So what I would love for Shanna to do, which I didn't actually preemptively ask her to do this, but I've been with Ant Culture only for about 4 months now, and Shanna's been with Ant Culture a little bit longer. So what I would love for her to do is give you just a brief history and a little bit about Ant Culture, and then I can talk to you guys just about my perspective since I've been on board. So Shanna.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Stephanie. So as Stephanie mentioned, I'm the people experience lead at Amp Culture. And so I've actually been in this position for a little over.
Oh, there.
All right, are you able to hear me? My headphones died on me, so I'm just using my computer here. So bear with me if there's background noise. I have dogs in the background that get a little excited here. But anyway, I've been with Ant Culture for almost 3 years, coming up this year. And quite honestly, I didn't know much about Ant Culture before I had applied. And so I had known a couple of connections, people who worked there, and they were really instrumental in, preparing me for, what could come. And so I actually entered Ant Culture as the director of first impressions, which is like one of the coolest names you can titles you can get out of college here. And so I just kind of worked my way through, and Ant Culture itself is just an incredible company with incredible people. And I know that sounds so cliche, but I hope it doesn't lose its power in that, the people that I work with and that Stephanie work with are so creative. They're collaborative. They're finding new ways to really break realities. And so we've worked on a variety of different projects. Now, bear with me, I don't work on any projects. I'm strictly internal. But we do get to have some what we call show and tell sessions and some of our weekend updates where we see some of the projects that we're working on. And so our team, if you would look at Ant Culture's website, you'll see a couple of different case studies and some of the things that they've done. It's anything from web development to application development to marketing to you name it. People come to Ant Culture and they bring one of their major problems or something that they just need to solve, and we find a way to solve it in so many different creative ways. And so you'll see, again, if you would look at our website, you'll see a couple of case studies and some of the things that the team has been able to do. One of the most talked about projects that we've worked on was called Edio, and it's actually an online school platform. So when you're thinking about cyber school, there's so much to it. There's the community aspect, there's the classroom aspect, there's anything outside of that and between that. And having so many people on the platform at that. And so what our team did is they completely created this platform, allowed this cyber school to be able to use this platform. And unfortunately, the pandemic had hit right after everything had happened, and we were still able to launch. And the team actually they doubled their attendance. And so, there's so many people that are on this platform. And I say unfortunately because, this pandemic has really caused a lot of different things happening. And but it really kind of worked out in favor of the cyber school to be able to transition completely and allow students to learn online. And so that's one of the biggest accomplishments at Ant Culture. But there's still so many projects and things that the team has been able to create and establish out of, they've been around like 20 some years and really just starting to grow within the last couple of years. So that's hopefully like a generalized version of it. Like I said, I personally don't get to see a ton of these projects, until it's like show and tell or anything like that. But it really blows my mind every time I see some of the things that we're creating, and just really so proud of the team that we have.
Thank you, Shanna. So to sort of reiterate, I know the thread that was put out, and if everyone could just mute their speakers, do me a favor. And whoever wrote the thread, the initial thread, and I'm trying to go back and find it, but if you're on here, which I assume you may be, can you pipe up for a second?
Yeah, that's me.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, good. Thank you so much for hosting this.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit, let's just like give some context to everybody here. I know you've all been watching this thread, but why don't you give me a little bit of context? Tell me your name, where you're from, and like where this email came from.
Yeah, sure. So my name is China Hill. I'm originally from Florida. I've been in LA for the past 5 years. I'm never, ever going back to the South. I love it here. So recently I saw a product inclusion UX researcher role with Google. I applied like 2 days later, recruiter reached out to me. It's like, hey, let's have a quick chat. But it was really vague, like chat about what? Like what questions should I expect? Like what are the expectations going into a conversation like that? I had no clue. I have a PhD and I'm a researcher, but I come from the academia. So we do some of the same work, but with different focuses and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah. So you were sort of reaching out to the group to sort of understand a little bit more about what this process looks like when it comes, when someone's reaching out to you after you've sent in a resume, what does that look like? Correct?
Correct.
All right. So, all right. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of introduction to myself, tell you guys a little bit about my journey. I've had a lot of jobs. I've applied for a lot of jobs. I've had about maybe 200 different versions of my resume that I have put out into the world at various times of my career. So I'm Stephanie Krell, and I'm the Executive Director of Strategy and Human-Centered Design at &Culture, which is based out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It is about a 80 to 100 person large design company. And it's not quite an agency and it's not quite a consultancy. And so they have dubbed themselves a design company, which is a very unique niche compared to a lot of what you see out there. For those of you who don't know, there's kind of a couple of different arenas when you're getting into the UX field. There's agencies, which are sort of front of house, meaning advertising, marketing, front end, right? There's consultancies, which are more product based, and they are really more on that fuzzy front end of what are we making or what solutions are we creating. And then you have in-house teams, right? Which are sort of could do it all. They might like run the gamut of things, but they typically are more in-house focused. You see a little bit more longevity. The projects go a little bit longer. They're a little slower. I mean, not always, but that is typical. Consulting pace is often extraordinarily fast as well as agency. So we are sort of.
啊，你还没吃啊？
Sorry, can you? We are sort of a mix of an agency meets consulting practice, meaning we have actually both the advertising and marketing piece on the back end after we have built the solution or on the front end versus after we've built the product on or service on the back end. So it's kind of a neat space. And I just give you that context so you have some idea. I come from both in-house and consulting practices. I started off my service design strategy career at Walt Disney in their lodging line of business. I worked on the initial strategy for the Star Wars Galactic Hotel. I moved over to Universal Studios where I built virtual and augmented mixed reality technology for theme parks. And then I went to consulting and I smaller consulting firm called HCL. And then I went over to Fjord Design and Innovation at Accenture, which is a premier design consultancy. And then have since, jumped around a little bit, where I've now eventually ended up here at InCulture, which is fairly exciting. But what that means is I've done a lot of applying. I've done a lot of interviewing, and I have built and grown a lot of different teams and departments. So it's been very fascinating. And I think one of the things that I really love to do, and the reason I'm a part of ADP List mentoring and some of these other things, is because there was never anywhere for me to find information. There was never guidance or information. Like, I could ask people to look at my resume, but that was really it. There was no, everything was always like the Wizard of Oz, right? The wizard behind the curtain. And you never really know what to look for. And when I saw your post, I thought to myself, why not get on and be able to answer all the questions, right? And be able to give you guys some insight and be able to alleviate some of the fear, but also to prepare you. There's nothing better than going into a meeting feeling like you have some semblance of knowledge. And before I go any further, on my LinkedIn page, there is the Anatomy of the UX resume and portfolio. So if you need some resume assistance or some portfolio assistance, there is a recording in there from the first meeting we did a couple months ago about building your UX resume and building out your UX portfolio, as well as LinkedIn networking. Oh, thanks, Liz. Another piece of advice that I have in there is I built a storyboard strategy for presenting your work when going into interviews, in terms of being succinct, having your top concepts ready to go, but also not boring the other party with just long, drawn out explanations of your story, but being very, very mindful about exactly what the core or the apex of the projects that you want to discuss are, and also turning your conversations to make them to be very conversational. When I facilitate, and not this kind of a session, but when I facilitate workshops, which is one of my expertise, I don't like to spend a lot of time just talking at people. I like there to be a lot of interaction. I like it to be conversational. I like there to be laughter and engagement. And that's the same thing that you should be striving for in your interviews. If you can make your interviewer laugh, you've done a good job, right? If you can elicit some kind of emotional response, preferably on the positive side, you're doing a good job, right? So always being mindful of creating a situation that engages and creates interaction between you and the person interviewing you is always a really good job. One of the things you can never anticipate is what the other person is going to be like, right? And there are good HR representatives and there are bad HR representatives. There are good interviewers and there are bad interviewers. There's good hiring managers and bad hiring managers. So you can't really change that, but what you can do is come prepared to understand both introverted and extroverted people and figure out how to meet your interviewer on the level that they're at, which is a big part of what we do in human-centered design. So it shouldn't be something super foreign to everybody here. Even though I know some of you are more researcher types, even though you've got your nose in a digital book, doesn't mean that you can't pick your head up long enough to, pick up the people skills and do some of the, body language reading. So what I'm going to do real fast is hand things back over to Shanna for just a moment and walk. I think what would be helpful to do is, when you receive a resume, right? What does that look like from just the process perspective of what you guys are dealing with?
Absolutely. Let me preface this with, AnCulture does things in their own AnCulture way. And so this may not be across the board. And I am also newer in my career here as well. And so there's still many things that I'm learning within the recruiting process. And my position itself handles a variety of things within HR. And so recruiting is just one hat that I wear out of a lot of different things. And so, when I'm handling and starting the recruiting process, first off is before we even post a job, I meet with hiring managers and try to understand some of the needs that they have. We understand, what are some things that we can look out for? Are we looking for specific skills? Do we want this position to be remote? And so many different ways. And the remote part is pretty new because of the pandemic. We personally at And Culture are all working remote to start, but we would be super excited to get back in person once it's safe. And so some positions have been tossed around the idea of having a remote worker full time or just to start. And so we work with hiring managers to understand those needs, those business needs that we can look for. So what happens for And Culture is we use a recruiting system and we try to streamline our information and our communication through this system to help us keep track of everything because again, it's myself in recruiting. That's one of the hats that I wear, but then we rely heavily on those hiring managers as well. And we kind of work as a team. We both review applications, we'll review resumes, and ultimately our hiring managers, at least for And Culture, our hiring managers. Hold on one second. That's all right. So our hiring managers will go through and they're really the experts in their field. They know exactly what they're looking for within applicants. And so we work hand in hand trying to find applicants who have some of the skills or maybe even a background or some exciting experiences that can, help us and really match what we're looking for. And so what I'll do is after we work with our hiring managers to see if there's some applicants that they're interested in, I start the phone screen process. And so this is an unofficial kind of interview. It's kind of what China had talked about earlier about having that interview like, hey, do you want to chat for a couple of minutes? It sounds scary. It really does. But for us, it's very casual. We really want to know who you are. We want to know some of the things that excite you, some of the things that you've been through. And, that really starts that process for us. And we're just doing research ourselves to see if you could be a fit in this position, or maybe there's another position that's available that your skills kind of meet. And so really it's just that introduction, understanding where you're at, some of the things that you're looking for. One of our questions that we ask is for a salary range. And that's not because we don't want to say, oh, we're not going to afford that. We really want to understand and be on the same page with employer candidates as they're going through this process, because we really value the time that the candidates put into everything. I mean, you're spending hours probably, and even days or weeks working on your resume, getting it tailored to exactly what you're looking for. And so your time obviously is very valuable to us. And we want to make sure that it's an appropriate fit before we would continue down the interview process and have hours of interviews or conversations to not be productive or anything like that. So truly it is a process to make sure that your time is used and valuable to us, and making sure that again, like I said, you're putting in so much work into your resumes, and even beyond that, you're putting in so much work to get the content in your resumes and that experience. And our overall process is just making sure that we get to connect, see how things fit, if you're looking for a remote or not, or anything like that. And then ultimately, after that kind of phone screen process for us, casual conversation, we go to the hiring managers. We kind of say, hey, these are my notes from this conversation. We had a good conversation. We talked about this, we talked about that. This candidate is interested in only a remote position, or maybe this candidate is open to relocation, or this candidate is a little bit above what we were budgeting. And we kind of work together and start to create what could happen, how we can move forward with certain candidates. And so after that happens, we go back to all of our candidates, kind of update them on the process, and our hiring managers choose the ones to move forward with. And that's not saying that any other candidate is just not a perfect fit or anything, but it really is trying to find that good match, a really good match who could fit into this role, whatever it may be. And so that's how the interview process is kind of started. And that initial interview with the hiring manager is really that first interview, I would say, beyond that phone screen.
All right.
Sorry, a lot.
Yeah, so I'm gonna open this up to questions after I'm gonna give you guys my perspective from the hiring manager side. And then we're going to open up some questions and also look through the documents because I know there are about 21 questions in here that I wanna make sure that we address. So, so when Shanna reaches out to me and she gives me like her download of notes, I've also kind of pre-screened a lot of the candidates and I'm looking at resumes. And for me, there's a couple of things I'm looking for. Does your resume have the experience that I'm looking for, right? If I'm looking for, because it's very dependent on level, right? So if I'm looking for an associate level strategist or something in that name, associate level researcher, I'm not looking for a ton of experience, right? But I am looking at your skill sets, right? So let me just give you an example. Looking at a lead UX strategist, a couple of the roles that I specifically need for this role to have is accessibility knowledge, as well as how to run a heuristics analysis. I'm looking for someone who knows wireframing, who can conduct user stories and can conduct at least basic user interviews. I have a strong research team, so the research piece for me isn't as important. So what I'm looking for with this role, right, is a specific set of skills, right, that I need to supplement the skills that I already have on the team. So sometimes if you feel like you're like, why am I being overlooked for this role? I felt like I was perfect for this role, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of the times it's a hiring manager has to look at what they already have on the team and what skills complete that team. On our team specifically at Culture, the human-centered design team is made up of sort of a couple of arenas, sort of research and strategy, or research, and we'll call it product strategy, UX, and marketing strategy and data analytics. So we have like a couple of different layers of the people that belong to the human-centered design group. Now, that being said, right, it means that when I'm looking for different candidates, based on their the experience levels or things that I'm seeking, if I'm looking for a lead level person, I want to see somebody who has at least some kind of, whether or not they've had management experience before, I'm at least looking for somebody that looks like they have the kind of experience that they can understand an entire project lifecycle, that that they've mentored or give back or cultivate other people, that they know how to deliver like expertly on a project. So depending on if I'm looking for like a more senior lead or if a more junior lead, depends on like whether or not I'm looking at their, their experience for certain words, right? Looking for words like manager or lead, looking for past experience as a senior level. But for me, a lot of what I'm seeking is that skills list. So make sure that your skills lists are front and center and easy to find. And I'm not looking for so on my resume, I have my skills section broken into 5 areas, right? Research and strategy and blah, 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 and blah, 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 right? So like, it helps me look, right? When I'm looking at a candidate, I can go over, and if you've bucketed your top level skills into easy to read sections, then I can be like, oh, yep. Oh, great. This person, they're either a senior level person with looks like some management or like cultivating mentoring skills. They've got all the right skill sets in the areas that I'm seeking. And I'll say, in the system, I'll say like, let's screen this candidate or whatnot. So it's all, and I know a lot of you are new or transitioning from academia out of academia. And I just want to say, I was a part-time educator for 6 years, and I worked in higher education for 5.5 years. So I have worked in higher education. For those of you who come from academia, it's an interesting transition to leave academia. Just wait, you're going to make so much more money. You will be very happy. But it does have quite a pace difference and a lot of political red tape which not to say we didn't have that in academia, but is very different. So for me, when I am specifically looking, right, and I hire service, so what I'm looking for is like service designers, which are very similar in some ways to UX researchers. There's a slight difference there for those of you who know or don't know. Oh, thank you, China. About, the differences between sort of what a UX researcher does and what a service designer is and does. If you've never heard of a service designer, I recommend that word to some of you because there's a lot of UX researchers that would make very excellent service designers. And service design is also another hot area for hire. And if you have the skills and capabilities to get into service design, it's a little more niche and harder to find people who actually have that skill set. So just a nugget for you to put in your hat, or feather for your hat. So when it comes to resumes, making sure that your resume is easy to scan and navigate, that you've called out your skills in a very easy to see and manage way, and that you've really listed the things that are being sought from the role. So if we've listed 10 skills that we are requiring, and you don't have those 10 skills on your resume, there's that disconnect. So be careful, right? I mean, don't lie, but you want to make sure that when you're aligning what you know how to do to the roles that you're applying for, there should be some alignment in that skill set right there. And it's kind of unique, right? Because I think sometimes we think oh, well, I should have all of this experience that looks like this experience. But a lot of the time, I might be looking for a role for, let's say, the associate strategist role that I have open. I'm looking for someone who has maybe a bit of knowledge in marketing, or it's sort of like a mixture, right? I don't expect people to have all of this knowledge, but data analytics, a little bit of marketing, human-centered design research, any kind of, strategic background. And depending on where you come from, maybe it's a little bit of customer insights or, different kind of statistics. And so having a unique background is great. It's calling out the skills from that unique background and making sure that those skills fit with how this role sees itself. So, for example, I was a photographer for 13 years before I moved into service design strategy. And it was a hard transition. And I was why? For a while, I was oh my God, I'm not getting any callbacks. And I can't even tell you how many versions of my resume I had to make. I went from having this 3-page long resume of all of my photography accomplishments to what is relevant here, right? What the hell is relevant from this crazy career that I had. I was a media director. I've built multiple teams. I've photographed everything from fashion icons to movie stars. It was this insane career. And then all of a sudden I'm, back at an entry level job in my mid 30s, just having gotten my master's degree and going what do I do, right? How do I tell people that I have all of, like, I've been a director. I know how to do this stuff. I have this history. And a lot of it was learning how to tell the story about how my past connects to my future. And even though that may not be as relevant for some of you, it's still relevant because you have to think about, how does your high school and college career set you up for success for this initial role? Same thing for those of you who are transitioning. How does my past career set me up for success? And the way I tell my story is that I've been a part of digital transformation since the day I walked off the stage. In my first early career in news journalism, I was a part of the transition of print and analog, news to digital and online storytelling. And I helped create digital systems. I helped develop online video storytelling. I helped develop an entire team of photographers going from, film to digital. And, it was a big part of getting the news industry set up for success. And not only that, but it was trying to understand what was going to drive people to the website, what was going to help increase sales, how did we tell the right stories, who was our audience, and how do we figure those things out, right? And that's a big part of what we do in UX research. But it's just, it took me a while to figure out how to tell that story, to think about the fact that I was doing all of these things. It was innate and natural for me in my career. I just didn't know how to tell that for a while. Once I had my story, and once I was able to write my resume in a way that reflected those things, then it was like, getting the callbacks was much easier. And the more that I've grown in my career, and I have to say, let's be real, we all know that having Disney and Universal Studios on my resume also helps get the callbacks because, brands, because that's kind of how it works sometimes. But those things, right, all of these things in tandem help you grow yourself. Slightly tangentially, as a thought for all of you to think about is that concept. Are you looking at a Fortune 50 company? Are you looking at a Fortune 500 company? Are you looking at a startup? Are you looking at a small design firm? Are you in-house? Are you consultancy? Are you agency? Like, thinking about where you want to focus your career and what skills are going to help you be successful in those spaces by understanding what that's going to mean, right? Big companies, big in-house companies are going to be a little bit slower, a little bit longer to climb the ladder, but you get the brand recognition, right? You probably don't get to do as much, but you get the brand recognition. Startup people, do I have any startup people here? Yeah, okay. So like, startup people, you guys get the plethora of experiences. They're like, I need someone who can do this, that. And you're like, I don't know how to do any of that. And they're like, okay, we'll figure it out anyway. So like, you kind of get thrown into the deep end of just, the make it work moment in startups. But it's great in some ways because that helps accelerate your career because you get a lot more experience in things that you may not have had access to at a larger company. So as all of you are considering this next step, know your company, know what benefits it has, know what limitations it has. Because if you go in to a big company, let's say like Disney, at an analyst level role, and you have high expectations of making it to manager in 2 years, guess what? Let's talk about resetting those expectations because that is just not how it works at companies like that. So, but you could, at a startup, end up going from an analyst to a manager level person in 2 to 3 years. It's possible. So it's very much dependent upon where do you see yourself, what are the goals you're setting for yourself, and how do you set yourself up for success. So that being said, are there any quick questions that I can take before going to the list? That are specific to any of the things that Shanna and I have spoken to. Either say them out loud or you can just lob them into the chat.
I just wanted to ask you something.
Sure.
Hi, Stephanie's Vita here.
Hi, Vita.
Hey, thank you for this. I just wanted to ask you, because I heard different sides of this, and especially being women
Mhm.
versus men, and this concept of feeling, especially as women, having the need to list every single skill set, or feel like you have to have the whole skill set in there, otherwise you won't apply. Where's the distinction here? Because I know it's impossible, having done some interviews myself, to fill in all the requests. And I've heard that companies deliberately put in as many requests for skills as they can because they want to see how far they can go. Can you please talk on that? That would be helpful.
Yeah. So, and Shanna and I may have like some difference in terms of experience in these things, but I'll go and then she can pipe up if she'd like. Typically what you find is if you can get 60% of the things that you're asking for in the job description, you're doing really good. Um, so like you put out like a big long job description and you're sort of expecting or hoping, right, for 10 out of 10. But usually that 10 out of 10 candidate is then out of your budget. So then you go to the next level and you're like, okay, like who's next, right? So remember, right, that if you're scoring 10 out of 10 on some of these jobs, right, you're like, oh, I can do all of this. You're probably not applying for jobs high enough up, right? You're probably looking a little too low because a job is something you're supposed to be growing into. And this is me talking as a mentor and not a hiring manager, but the idea is that your next job should be a place for you to grow, not a place for you to just laterally move because you can or because you're afraid to reach for higher. So it's a mixture of making sure that your resume is setting you up for success, but also applying for things that are a little beyond you, because that's the point. That's how you get better and that's how you grow into the next thing. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It does. Yeah, because I've tried to overreach, and I think this is a really key thing I've noticed with my other, fellow research wannabes and other researchers, that this is a problem, especially with women, that we don't shoot high enough.
Yes, we don't shoot high enough. It was interesting because when I was sort of toying around in sort of the senior lead level arena, I was really frustrated because I'm like, like for me, my goals, I have lofty goals. I want to be a CXO, which is a chief experience officer. And specifically, I want to do it because as a woman, it's been very hard to climb the ladder. And I'm also tired of some of the awful misogyny you kind of come across. But at the same time, I also want to create better pathways for others and remove some of the politics that you see at the top that are always so like, have you ever seen that fail up mentality? And
Yeah.
I'm very about the fail up mentality. So for
Yeah.
me, I do put a lot of my skills into my resume. So like if you see my resume, it is full of data and information because I know there were some questions here about that automatic system that looks, I don't know if we do ATS at Ann Culture. I don't think we do. So we actually look at all of the resumes that come in the door, which is harder because we're smaller. I mean, for us, we're a smaller organization. It's harder for like a Google, right? Because they're probably getting 1,000 applicants all the time. But when you apply for some of the smaller ones, right, your resume is getting looked at, right? Personally, so Andy Shaw, who is my director of digital strategy, he reads the cover letters. I have to tell you, I do not read cover letters. So like, I don't read them, but I also literally sit on almost 16, freaking Zoom calls every day. So like when I find time to read things, it's very short. So I do look at portfolios. I do look at resumes. And if I have time, I'll do a quick browse of a cover letter, but cover letters kind of went out. I think, there's a couple companies that still really rely on cover letters like Frog and IDEO, but not a lot of companies are reading cover letters these days. So not to say that you shouldn't take the time and have a good one, because I think there's always good benefit to practice makes perfect. But yeah, so, but I do have a very thick resume full of skill set. But when I apply for jobs, I'm looking at where is there room for growth? Like how do I see myself growing into this title? If I could step into the job and just do it with no effort, it's probably not where I need to be. And part of why I came to Ant Culture was because, there was an opportunity to build something, and that had so much more meaning for me than anything else. All right, so let me look back through some of these things.
While you're looking, Stephanie, do you mind if I chime in a little bit about the cover letters?
Absolutely.
So personally, in college, I was always taught, have a cover letter, have a cover letter. And so whenever I was applying, I had my cover letter, I had resumes tailored to each position that I was applying for. And then now that I am wear a recruiting hat is what I'll say. I personally will look at cover letters whenever we decide to move forward with a candidate. I think it tells me a little bit more about candidates beyond just a resume. I like that human element to it, but as Stephanie had mentioned, it really is personal preference of hiring managers. We have we have so much work at Ant Culture. And like I said, we're working on so many different things. Stephanie's in back-to-back meetings, I'm in back-to-back meetings. And so it does become really hard to carve out hours at a time to go through every single piece. Although we would love that, it really is about making sure you're able to highlight some of those big things. So back to a couple minutes ago when Stephanie had talked about resumes and making sure your skills are there, make sure your resume is clean and easy to read. That is my biggest advice, because you're right, when hiring managers are looking at that, they want to make sure that they're able to see those key elements that they're looking for. And a lot of times it's really hard if you have your information scattered. So for the researchers, for UX, it really is kind of that element of trying to find, how am I going to lay out my resume so that it makes the most sense, so that I'm really pulling in my key elements, my assets that I can bring to this job. Sometimes people will list their universities like right at the top, and others will list it right at the bottom. And it really depends on who you're working with or who you have like as a mentor. But I've personally been taught, put some of your older qualifications at the bottom and make sure that you're highlighting some of those things. It's kind of like a sandwich, have those most important things at the top, some of those other important elements of, maybe you've had study abroad experience or you're fluent in this language or anything like that. Have that at the bottom, and then really make sure you have the bulk of your information laid out right there within the resume, but in a clean way. So I guess that's really my best advice, is to make sure that it is easy to read. A lot of times colors can be really distracting if you have like a multicolored thing, although it looks beautiful and really cool. Make sure the color and font is easy to read and accessible.
And that being said, right, you guys belong to design teams, right? I know your UX researcher role says research in it, but you will be hired into a design team or a creative team usually. And that means that you guys should have creative-based resumes. So if I open a resume and it looks like a scientist wrote it, like it came out of a Word doc, I'm gonna be a little suspect. So do yourself a favor and hire yourself a designer to help design a version of your resume, right? Even if it's just a background, but like Shanna said, clean and simple, right? Clean and simple, but well designed and well laid out. So do yourself a favor and just make sure that your resumes are standing out a little bit, because creative teams that get, Word doc resumes are going to look at them, kind of sideways and be like, do you belong on a creative team? So, all right, so a couple of these questions in here. It says marketing versus UX research, the different resumes you mentioned, how important is it to emphasize one versus the other for the role? I mean, you definitely, it's a tough one, right? So when I was younger, I was often applying for different kinds of jobs, right? That fell into kind of different categories. And so I would have different resumes that would emphasize different things. So if I was applying for a marketing job, I would have more of my marketing words and terms and all that stuff like highlighted. If I was applying for a, more of a research or strategy job that was more product based or something, then I'm going to highlight those things. So do yourself a favor and have, multiples. If you're applying for multiple kinds of jobs, have multiple resumes ready to go, because I think it does matter. So like even for our associate strategist role that we're hiring for right now, it has a lot of categories to it. Specifically, we're hunting more marketing at this moment, but we may put out the same job in a couple of months and be looking for more human-centered based or like UX research-based person. So it's sort of like, you just kind of never really know sometimes, especially at certain levels, but like we're hiring a content strategist. And that content strategist is very specific, right? Like there's not a lot of wiggle room in it. So sometimes it's useful to have a very generalized resume, right? Something that's kind of overall if you're applying for jobs that are very general, or have your sort of specific based resumes. It says, are there differences in what consultancies and agencies are looking for versus startups and in-house? That's hard to say, but I would let you know that for me, I know that when I get a candidate that comes from consulting and agency world, I know exactly what I'm getting. I'm getting someone who knows, end-to-end product lifecycle. I'm getting someone who knows how to deal with chaos. I'm getting someone who knows how to deal with client relationships. I'm getting somebody who can thrive in fast pace, who can work on multifaceted teams. So when I'm pulling someone from consulting, I know I'm going to get those qualities, usually, full of skill and capability, a lot of experience jammed into one. But you're also possibly pulling in a very competitive personality, people that are used to a dog-eat-dog environment, toxic work environments, et cetera. There's, even though you have to be highly collaborative, there's a lot of, being pitted against each other. So in-house agencies, you're going to find people that are probably a little more relaxed, and you're getting a more, collaborative and easygoing person, but you might not get the same skill set in terms of someone who's been on an end-to-end, go-to-market strategy from, the fuzzy front end of the how might we all the way out to, a marketing campaign. So, it just really depends. And I think and it also depends on your level. So a higher level role is going to want a certain level of experience. So agency people, like after they say that if you've been in consulting a year, it's like 3 years of experience. So anytime you go into consulting, it can give you quite a bit of a bum rush of experience. So there is that positive. It also burns you out. So 3 years in consulting and sometimes you want to die. So there is that particular, aspect to it as well. So, but you also have much more opportunity to grow in consulting at a faster pace. So you can come in as an entry level or associate level and be like a senior level in 3 years, whereas the likelihood of being able to do that in an in-house agency is not always as fast, if that makes sense. How many of the required skills do you need? Do they need to match the exact wording and posting? So not exactly. Like if I'm asking for affinitization or affinity mapping and you write affinitizing or something, like some version of the word, it's fine. You can write customer journey maps, customer maps, right? Like I'm going to get the gist of that idea as well. But you do want the skill sets to be fairly like right on. How about for you, Shanna? What are you looking for?
I would say, yeah, if you can keep it kind of in that same family, Some of those buzzwords. Those are some of the things that, you know, when someone's scanning through a resume, it pops out a little bit easier because it's something that you're looking for. So keep it kind of consistent as much as you can. But there's definitely some varieties, and people use different phrases and stuff. So if it's, you know, exactly what Stephanie had said, like journey mapping or just mapping or anything like that, again, just make sure it's kind of within that same family.
Why don't hiring managers offer feedback post interviews? Well, so it's twofold. Well, it's probably threefold. First is legal reasons. We have to be very careful, right? Like if I reached out to somebody and said, listen, you just don't have it, right? Like, you know, there's just like all kinds of problems there. So there's a lot of legal reasons why we cannot reach back out and provide, you know, post interview feedback. Another reason is, like I mentioned before, some days I have 16 back-to-back Zoom meetings, and the amount of time I have to give feedback is, I mean, I'm literally trying to raise a team that I have to mentor and give feedback to day to day. Having the time to do that for like, you know, interviewing a bunch of candidates is also not, sometimes it's just very hard to prioritize that. But also mostly it could, you know, first of all, there's a lot of crazy people in this world. And secondly, there's a lot of legal repercussions that could happen to giving that kind of feedback.
I second that. You know, as much as it would be great to help people out, and I personally, and I know Stephanie has the same type of heart, wanting people to succeed and see where they can grow and all of that. But there are definitely some legal repercussions that we have to be careful about. As well as there are times I had 20 phone calls last week or the week before with, you know, we're hiring for different positions. And so a lot of times it's really, really difficult to remember every single piece and element beyond what I have in my notes to be able to bring up all of that. But again, with the legal repercussions, that's another huge element to it. So what I would suggest, instead of maybe even reaching out to a hiring manager, make sure you have a mentor, make sure you have someone who you can practice going through an interview with. And they are really going to be the ones who can give you that upfront feedback because they know you a little bit better. They know when you're nervous about something, they can teach you through and guide you through some of those. So that was advice that I was given. And I really appreciated that because I think it's so important to practice first and foremost, but also be comfortable enough with someone who can give you that feedback. Because a lot of times, at least for me, I'm only just chatting with people on the phone. I don't really know who they are. And, you know, I don't like to upset people or anything in many different ways. I want you all to know that your experiences, everything that you have done is such an accomplishment, and it shouldn't bring you down. Job hunting, I know, is so scary. It can be many different things, but remember your worth and remember that all of the time that you've put into it is so valuable to yourself and where you see your career go. And sometimes it takes a little bit, it takes some trial and error before you find that sweet spot, before you find that position where you were meant to be or where you can thrive. So don't get yourself too down on some of these things. I know that's hard to say because I've been in your shoes as well. It can be very difficult. It's draining. But just remember your worth and be able to speak to that and continue to improve the things that you can improve.
Luke, are you still here? I know you posted about advice for mid to late, very senior folks who are working.
I'm still here with my 5-month-old Lucy on mute.
Luke, your question is very specific, and the thought I have for you is, number one, you should reach out to me. We should have a further mentoring discussion about that, because that's a whole other bag of worms. That's a very specific to your case situation. So find me on LinkedIn and send me a note and we'll talk. Secondly, the answer to that is, for those of you who are on here, if you don't know what adplist.org is, it's a great place to find mentors. It's actually a mentorship organization that connects people and does a ton of talks and seminars. And it's a way for you to look up people from different companies where you can connect. I found a mentor for myself who is the VP of Global Product at Hyatt Hotels. It's a great way to connect with different individuals, especially if you're targeting specific companies and you want to get in or make a connection there or talk to them about like how to stand out. It's a great way to do that. So I definitely recommend that.
Stephanie, can I send you an email or connect with you because I have a specific question similar to that?
Absolutely.
I just want to give you a heads up.
And
Thank you so
Stephanie, do you mind if I chime in just one quick second? Now, this could be unique to And Culture, but for us in particular, we have some employees who have changed their careers and have come to And Culture. And I love to say that we quote, buy into people's passions or try to offer opportunities when they're available. And I mean, I'm one of them, but we have a couple of researchers who have been in the education background and have transitioned into the roles that they're in today. And so there's definitely something to be said. There are skills that are they're transferable. And so make sure you can speak onto that. And as Stephanie had mentioned, I'm sure she can offer a lot more advice with some more experience as well. But I want you to have a little bit of excitement here that, those skills are transferable. You can speak to them, and there are companies that are willing to take in and give people opportunities where you never may have expected.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you. Can you mention that company again that does mentorship? You said ADP. What is it?
Yeah, hold on. I'm going to put it into the main chat.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yep, there it is. A bunch of people. Yep. All right. So I am, for those of you who wrote questions in the chat, I'm going to move over to the document. So if I didn't get to your question, if you can move your question over to the document, what I can do over the next couple of days is try and get around to ones that we don't get to this afternoon. So I'm going to repost that link. But I want to make sure I get to some of these. So yes, so the question is there a definite competitive advantage if one applies through a referral, knows a hiring manager versus a cold apply? So the answer is almost always. I mean, we do consider every candidate, but taking the time to get to know somebody, make an introduction. I always recommend networking on LinkedIn, right? Find somebody that you can know inside the company, get a referral, get that way in. Yeah, absolutely. See you. But I definitely recommend getting to know somebody internally if you can. Even almost every referral space or program has this person has been referred by, right? And so you can kind of reach out to that person and be like, how do you know so-and-so, et cetera. Shanna, anything else to add there?
Yeah, so I mean, referrals are often really helpful because you kind of have that first interaction. There's a connection there. But as Stephanie had mentioned, we do look at every single resume, at least for And Culture, and try to give people as many opportunities as possible. And so we have had a few people hired through recommendations, and we've also had people hired that had no prior knowledge to And Culture. And Stephanie is one of them that we're super excited that she came across And Culture's posting. And so I think depending on the company, it could be a little bit different.
So I have seen a lot of companies. So this question is about what are my thoughts about companies doing like research exercises as part of the hiring process? I don't require it. Now, granted, I know that a lot of companies do this excessive process where they sort of make you go through a lot of hoops to do a thing, which in a lot of ways, when you have, a couple thousand candidates or whatnot, or a couple hundred candidates, I suppose I can understand why that's a thing or why it's so important. But honestly, I find for myself that I can determine whether or not you know enough about what I need you to know about from a conversation. So I know it's kind of sort of a trend right now to do that kind of research, or like that exercises from, interviewing, but I don't always love it because I feel like it's a cheap, free way to get ideas for some companies. And so it's not something that I would have enjoyed going through myself, but I think that there is some frameworks that you can set up for yourself that provide enough of the process and knowledge of maybe what they're looking for without just giving away free ideas. So, do your best to protect your own internal IP. That's how I see it.
Agreed. In UX, it's a little bit more specific. We do have a lot of engineers, and we've created kind of like a standard, not test, but like project, very mini project for in the past. And it was helpful because one, it was the same across the board for every single person who applied for that. And I think it's more towards engineers, but when you're talking about UX and researching, there's so much that could be going into that. And so I'm sure you want to protect your IP and all of that as well.
I love this question. So this question says, what traits or experiences do you look for when I'm hiring for different roles? And this one is specifically strategy and service design. But this can also be said about researchers. And granted, I think what I'm expecting out of a researcher is somewhat different, but depending on the role, right, I'll be looking for different kinds of personality types. If the role requires someone to be a facilitator, I want to know that they can carry conversation, that they're good at reading body language, that they can look me in the eyes, that I feel comfortable talking to them, that they can carry a very casual or fun and interesting conversation with me. I'm also looking for people who think outside the box, right? I don't, and I can be a little bit different in my desires for what I'm looking for, but I'm not looking for a bunch of me's, right? Like, what's the point of that? I'm looking for a bunch of people who challenge the way I think, who bring something unique to the table, who have a perspective that is different. But I'm also looking for people who know the basics, right? Like, do you know what the 5 Ds of design are? Do you can you talk like ad nauseum about it? Can you articulate, right, the process of UX, of how you get to the answers, why key insights are so imperative and how they affect a project, etc. Right? So there's definitely some core things, right, that I'm looking for in terms of skills and capabilities, but also very much I'm checking out your personality. Are you going to be a good fit? Are you the kind of person that, is a big part of it is like, what if I have 2 exact same candidates, right? Same skills, same everything. Well, when it comes down to it, I'm going to look for the fit that is going to get along with my team. Right. The last thing I want to do is bring in someone who's going to rub everybody the wrong way or create, any kind of negative culture. Right. So a big part is personality wise, like, do you fit? And not saying that I want you to be exactly like everybody, but are you going to be able to get along? Are you going to round out the team? Are you bringing something different with you? So I think one of the things you can do in your resumes is really, what is that thing, right, that's kind of special to you? A big part of what I do on the side is, besides mentoring, is I have volunteered with Battered Women's Shelter and Rape Crisis Center for almost my entire adult life. It's very important to me. It's an area that I'm very much a part of, empowering women, taking care of women, and being a part of these things. And so you know, I have a lot of volunteer experience and I have all this media and photography experience, right? So that's a unique aspect to me as a person and to me as a skill set. And so I look for people who have hobbies and expertise and knowledge in other areas that, you know, we have this amazing strategist. She brings luxury brand knowledge with her, right? Like, and that's unique and cool and awesome. And that she has that capability. I have another person on my team, my director, writes books, like has literally written a parenting book. So it's just like, you know, when you're looking at people, you're not just looking at a certain set of skills, but you're looking at the culmination of their knowledge and what they, you know, are, who they are as people. So I think that that's another piece. As far as Shanna, do you have any thoughts about like personalities and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you could tell a lot about someone just chatting with them. And my advice whenever you are in an interview, if it's like a phone screen or something, answer the phone and introduce yourself and be a little bit enthusiastic or passionate and show that, you know, you're excited to chat with them. That really starts off and shows us a little bit about your personality. You know, I've had people answer the phone and say hello, like they don't expect my call. And then I've had people that were just so warm and welcoming who were super excited to chat with me. And, you know, I think personality wise, it is super helpful. You could share, bring that human element to it. We are talking about human centered design here. So don't be afraid to share a little bit about some of your hobbies and stuff. And I personally talk through some of the benefits and things at And Culture. And we have a group of people who are involved in different hobbies. So we have a Get Fit crew in our Slack channels. So, you know, they're constantly running 5Ks. Personally, that's not me. I don't like to run unless I'm being chased or something. I don't run. But, you know, they keep each other accountable. They're talking about different running routes that they've done in local areas. They'll talk about biking routes. We have people who love board games or any type of game. And so we have like a nerd night where we'll do virtual party games or something like that just to hang out with people. We have people who are super passionate about volunteering and so many different elements. So if you can bring that a little bit of that human element, I personally, I think that is welcomed and really love to see that personality come through. And it really adds a little bit to you and who you are.
So I'm going to run through a couple of these questions that are pretty technical, pretty fast. So there's a couple that are sort of similar in terms of, you know, experience in other fields, but not real experience in UX research. How do you present yourself, or what do you do in order to change from one field to another? And the key for anybody who's doing a transition is utilize old, like current language in old job descriptions, right? Like when I talk about even my photography, right? I still talk about doing market research. I talk about, you know, understanding the end customer. I talk about, you know, different kinds of storytelling. I talk about, you know, doing the research and market understanding to, you know, look at competitors and benchmarking, et cetera, right? I did all of those things. I just didn't have those terms back in those days. You know, I wasn't, and those weren't my main focuses. I was mostly taking pictures and creating, you know, a lot of media creation, but I still did a lot of that stuff. So utilize your now glossary for your past. So if you were a researcher, but just not a UX researcher, figure out how to talk about what you did, but apply like how you would apply it, you know, like sort of what you would do now in the same terminology of how you talk about your past. I'm a big believer in, like, you know, you can pull the things that you did from your past into your now. So, you know, don't be afraid to refer to your, you know, past experience, you know, as, you know, with some of that great terminology that sets you up for current success. that being said, it is hard to go from like, I wasn't able to go from a director of media to a director of experience design, right? I had to kind of dip back down and come back up. And I don't think everyone has to do that. I think I just didn't have the right resources available to me at the time to understand how to do what I needed to do. So have your story, utilize your now terminology in past work, and figure out how what you've done in the past is relevant to the now work that you're trying to do. Did you do past research? In what ways? What were those outcomes? And again, back to my anatomy of a resume link, I talk a lot in there about how to do some of that. So definitely reference though that it's like an hour and a half long. So just reference that because it talks a lot about how to build out the resume in a way that like it has like sentence structure that is action, outcome, impact. Every sentence should be built. I did a thing, it created this and had this impact, right? So every sentence should be sort of written out that in that way to talk about the real like feeling of what it was that you did accomplish on some of these jobs. So that's a quick one. As far as quantitative skills are concerned for qualitative UX research and pivot tables, I can tell you that I sat through 3 classes at Disney on how to make a pivot table and I still can't make a pivot table. So, and I'm an executive director, so I don't think it's that important from my perspective, but what do I know? We do have a data analytics person. Yeah, I agree. Pivot tables are the worst. I do have a data analytics guy. He is amazing. He's a true unicorn sometimes. And he does most of, and we have I have another strategist who's actually pretty all right at some of the quantitative things too, but we don't, the marketing side has more of a quantitative focus, but our human-centered design side has a little bit less. Sometimes our business designers, if, business design is a new up and coming role. I don't know if you've heard of it. Business design sometimes has more of a financial angle to it. We're not hiring for that. Typically, you won't see that in UX research or in human-centered design. All right, what else is in here? What level of product development knowledge should one have to be an impactful researcher at a tech company? I think it's good if you can to know the process, right? I talk about the 5 Ds. There's all kinds of, right? It's some sort of discovery, some sort of definition of what it is, some sort of design and ideation, and then some sort of delivery, right? 5 Ds, 4 Ds, sometimes it's all kinds of words, right? There's a billion versions of it, but it's the process of how to get from what we don't know to a solution. And you should know kind of how that feels and what that looks like. You should understand a little bit about how Agile works in our environment. You should understand enough about the general terminologies of everything from Scrum to Agile to Lean Six Sigma to human-centered design, service design, UX, design strategy, design research, and design thinking. At least have a base knowledge of those terminologies and kind of what they mean. You don't have to be an expert in all of them, but having some baseline knowledge is going to help you. As far as standouts, right? I think it goes back to clear, concise resumes and skill sets, right? I honestly think, and I think there are some past job histories that are going to be interesting. Like, did you hold a unique title? Did you work for a unique company? But I think most of the time I'm looking for, what skills do you bring to the table? And then what are your, if you have an interesting opening sentence or something that's sort of unique about you, I think is always something that makes candidates stand out. So I think we are getting pretty late into the evening. What Shanna and I can do this week is maybe put our heads together and add some more answers to this document. So if there were questions in this chat that we didn't get around to, Definitely feel free to copy and paste your question over into the document, keep tabs on the document, and we'll provide some answers. In there, is there any other like last minute dying questions you just have to have before we sign off for the night?
Thank you so much for this and your energy and your time. It's like so awesome. I just really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you took the time. What?
I second that. I second that. It's really nice of you. It's very rare, very hard to find people who want to set aside their time. I'm spending 3 years trying to find a mentor, from anywhere from that to just people spending 1 hour or 15 minutes talking to me. So yes, we appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Sorry. Thank you again. I really use your previous chat and resume and portfolio to improve mine, and I really see the influence and, you know, getting call back from some places that I applied. But my current question is about some positions we applied and we didn't hear back from them. Can we just follow up with the recruiters or somebody at the company to see, or they, you know, see the resume? Is it something I was not sure is it a good thing or not? So I'm just wondering, is it helpful or not?
So I think it can be hard. You know, again, legal, sometimes we can or cannot reach back out to you in response. So if you're not getting a response, it's possibly because legally it's complicated for us to do so. But you can always, you know, make an attempt. I think every company is a little different. Some people you'll have more results with, and some people, you know, you just won't. So I think it's very, you know, dependent on those things.
Yeah, I second that. I think it really depends on the size of the company as well, if they're able to have time to respond to all of that. And for us, I have responded to a couple of emails that had said, hey, I just applied to this position, just checking in. I've been able to respond with pretty generic, like, hey, we're still reviewing resumes and all of that. But it doesn't hurt to try to reach out. Just understand sometimes you may not get a response, although I hate to say that because I wish you would all get kind of that closure or anything. But I would say, you know, it doesn't hurt to try to reach out, especially if it's a role that you were really excited about. So, but I also kind of wanted to chime in here that it says a lot about all of you for sitting on a call on a Tuesday night for an hour and a half and hearing some of what Stephanie and I have to say. But I appreciate Stephanie inviting me to this. I really enjoyed it. I was a little nervous. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I really appreciated getting to hear some of the questions that you all have. And I wish you all the best of luck and hope to maybe cross paths with you at some point. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
And I want to say for all of you, the most important thing that I would love to impress upon you is this. If you don't send the application, then you can't reject the job, right? You know, I mean, there's never a harm in reaching and dreaming and knowing that you are special and that you have potential. And, you know, I was someone who often felt like I had untapped potential and I could never get my bosses to see me, right? Like I always struggled to feel seen or to feel like I was able to achieve everything that I knew I could do. And, you know, I've had, you know, people throughout my life who are like, you want too much, you expect too much, blah, blah, blah. And then I think somewhere in my mid 30s, I just decided that, you know, screw all those people. And I was gonna do it anyway. I was going to, you know, apply for the job and expect what I wanted and work for what I wanted. And I was just gonna make it happen for myself. And once I kind of got past letting other people kind of dictate what I should and shouldn't do, you know, I was able to begin to follow my dreams the way that I wanted to. So, you know, people are well-meaning and they don't necessarily always mean to pull you down, but you are your best advocate. You know what you can do. You know what you're capable of. Follow your heart and follow your dreams, and don't let people tell you what you can't do. So That being said, Beta, I do 3 hours of mentoring a week through ADP List, so you are definitely welcome to find me there. I've been doing ADP List for almost a year since I had lost my job in the pandemic before I came to InCulture, and I'm a very loyal mentor for them. They inspired me when I felt lost and when I struggled. So I encourage all of you to check that out. Find yourself a mentor, find yourself some, just some good network and connection on there. And looking forward to hearing from you guys. Don't be strangers, and find me on LinkedIn. Make sure you send me a note though, because I don't like to accept messages or connections from people who don't say hi. So make sure you say hi. All right. All right, everybody, have a great night and good luck to all of you. Don't hesitate to reach out to me with questions if you run across things that you need, okay?
Good night.
And
Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.